Welcome back to another edition of the Kevin Moore Show. Now, on today's show, I'm going to be interviewing the author, Winfrey. Now, Winfrey co-wrote the book on David Wilcock being the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. Now, to give a bit of background on Winfrey, he currently resides in the Arizona area. He is a songwriter, poet, and freelance writer. He is also the co-author of the book The Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, Interdimensional Communication and Global Transformation. Now, in the book, Winfrey explores the remarkable parallels between the work of David Wilcock and the legendary Edgar Cayce. Now, while he builds a convincing case that the two men share the same source of channeled information and that Wilcock might indeed be Cayce's reincarnation. So, before we go to the interview, I'm going to play back almost 6 minutes of some of David's original channeling where David brings through the Ra group with Winfrey over the phone. Now, this was taped sometime back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So, enjoy my interview with Winfrey.
I am Ra. We greet you in the light and love of the one infinite creator. We communicate now through the entity known as David Wilcock, and we are ready for your first question.
Thank you. Could you explain how in the cosmos you are able to communicate through David?
Material has been covered before, but we shall speak briefly on this point. The connection that we have is what we have previously referred to as a narrow band vibration. This means that the degree to which the in-streaming energies penetrate through the vehicles or layers of the soul within the entity to whom we are speaking requires a very precise bandwidth, if you will, of frequency. This necessitates an extreme purity in the workings and on behalf of the entity doing said channeling process. This does then indicate the degree of difficulty to which such a connection must be secured, by virtue of the fact that it is not a wide stream of available focus. In many other cases of channeling, there is the opportunity for the entity involved to have some degree of free will choice over the wordings and over the precision of thoughts and how they are expressed in their various forms through language as the vehicle. In this case, however, we feed the words into David's mind complex through a very precise process, and each of these words are very carefully chosen. This is the difference, and it requires a higher form of attenuation and focus than other forms of channeling that allow for a greater degree of flexibility, fluidity, and improvisation in the status and nature of the working as such. Does this answer your question, my brother?
On our planet right now, we seem to be in a place of uncertainty in the world. People are afraid of things that are going to happen. People don't know about the future. And the particular topic for this article that this interview is covering is concerning the world in 2003, the changes that are happening in the world, and how people can relate to them. Is that too general to present, to have you discourse on?
We do find that the question bears enough resemblance to an appropriate query as to be worthy of some degree of litigation at this point, so we shall proceed as planned. The litigation that we refer to is that legal work in one who would seek to engender the law of one in mind, body, and spirit focus. This focus then redirects one's vital energies towards the seeking of the original creative thought that unifies the universe in a way that no other thought has or ever will. This original thought is that of unity, of love and wisdom, as the paired components of the photon, which then forms your physical reality system. Understand that the vibratory qualities of your sphere have been in flux for some measure of your years of time, as you would think of it. These changes revolve around the passage of your galaxy, or what you would refer to as solar system, into a higher level of etheric density in what you would refer to as your galaxy of the Milky Way. These zones of energetic density are naturally layered in such a fashion as to appear to be like the pinwheel spiral when seen from the northern galactic pole looking downward. These zones of energetic density are also corresponding with frequencies of consciousness and levels of development within said consciousness. We have spoken before about the degree to which these changes have resulted in the appropriate adjustments to the DNA of the physical bodily forms. This is a natural consequence of the changing structures that you are passing into. Many of those on your plane who have studied...
Hi, my name is Winfrey, and I am the principal author of the book about David Wilcock that I wrote with him called The Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce.
Why did you write this book?
I have been a long-term fan of Edgar Cayce. When I was younger, I probably read 20 to 30 books about Edgar Cayce. He was the first person to turn me on to actually believe that there was something spiritual, there was something beyond the physical. I was writing articles for a web magazine, and I stumbled upon David Wilcock's website, and I started reading his channelings that he was posting at the time, and I got transformed. They were actually extremely deep, profound, aware, and then I saw the section where he made a connection with himself and Edgar Cayce. He never actually said he was the reincarnation of, but he had a connection. But he did show this picture and I know it doesn't matter. And I learned that people look like their past lives because the DNA transfers in your soul. And now that's not obviously scientific fact. So go along with me. Not only did David look like Cayce, his father looked like Cayce's father. His friend looked like Cayce's wife. There's his father. And his friend looked like Cayce's wife. And then there were a lot of other things connecting him to Cayce, which I went through in the book I wrote about it. But what happened, my first step was, I called my editor. I'm writing articles for a magazine. I said, I think I found the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, and I want to interview him. And she looked at his website, and she said, I saw his website, and he looks like a wacko to me. And I told her, he might be a wacko, but he's the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. So she said I could interview him, but she wouldn't promise to run it until she saw it. So I interviewed David. I turned it in, and she called me back gasping, saying, "Oh my God, you're right. He has to be Edgar Cayce." And then she said, "I think you're the one that's supposed to write the book about it." And I kept studying Wilcock, and then I had a reading from him. He was doing readings at the time. And the more I did it, the more I said, this is going to be the most important thing I ever did in my life. And I did it not just to prove that Wilcock was Cayce, but half the book is his channelings. And we are in an extraordinary time in the history of our planet. Things are breaking down. People are afraid. People are losing connection with spirituality. People are making connection with spirituality. And Wilcock's source was addressing those things. And I realized some of the people watching this know Wilcock as an ET person, a conspiracy person. He had his channel on Gaia TV, and he stopped talking. Once the book came out, he stopped talking about his channelings and the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. And the book, I wrote the book, obviously. Wilcock was my co-writer. Actually, I wrote most of it. He wrote 2 chapters, and half of the book was his channelings. So he's a co-writer. And he also had right of editing on the things that I wrote. And there are some people, when I go on YouTube and look at comments, they think that David and I were in collusion to make a bunch of money to prove he was Edgar Cayce. And nothing could be further from the truth. David and I, it was a nightmare working with David. He was scared to have this book come out. He at various times tried to sabotage it. And I kept pushing it through, and I pushed it through because of the channelings. One of the things, this book is not anything like the David Wilcock you see on YouTube, even the new books that David Wilcock wrote. Here's some comments from people that read the book. This book may be the most important work in contemporary spirituality on how to maintain one's connection to divinity on a planet in transition. And that's from Beverly Craig, who is a senior minister at the La Cañada Church of Religious Science. Another one, most important book I have ever read. This book combines spirituality, science, and theory, and I would not stop speaking it or speaking about it. While some of the information was new and foreign to me, it resonated and kept me reading. Thank you for publishing such great information. And some of the most lucid and loving spiritual advice, wisdom I have ever read. And the most important book I have ever read. This book is mind-blowing. I mean, this is not the way people respond to David now. And some people may. But in my opinion, this book was a greater contribution of Wilcock than his disclosure stuff, although I understand why he did it. And I'll share with you why Wilcock took such a big stand against the negative and did what he did.
So Winfrey, you always had an interest in the esoteric, the mysteries, a deeper spiritual seeking, I'm guessing, right? And at the time when you came across David Wilcock's Ascension 2000 website, what where were you as a person at that time?
Well, I was interviewing people. I was interviewing people like Greg Braden and Uri Geller and Ram Dass for this metaphysical spiritual magazine. I was a little frustrated in my life because I developed myself to be an extremely good singer-songwriter, and I wanted to change the world through music. And I was in Hollywood, and I was writing songs with a famous person. I had songs published with a big publisher. I had some songs recorded. And then I had a song that got stolen, and it became a big, huge hit. And it freaked me out. And I wasn't strong enough to stand up against it. I withdrew. I said, I don't trust anybody. My life fell apart for years. And then I started writing articles for this magazine. And then the way I actually discovered Wilcock was kind of funny, because somebody that I knew sent me an email about an article in Rents.com. You know Rents? You know Rents? No? Yeah, it's kind of an alternative conspiracy website with Jeff Rents. And the article was talking about the Indian guru Sai Baba, and it was exposing him as gay, and that he would take some of his disciples into his private room and he'd end up having some kind of sex with them. Now, I was curious, I wonder who wrote that article. And there was a link on the bottom of it, and I ended up on the Ascension 2000 website. And then I read something and it intrigued me, and I read a little more, and then I read the Cayce connection, and I had enough connection with Cayce at that point to say, I think this guy, if he's telling the truth, might be the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. That's how it started.
Yeah, so he goes by the name Ra/Wilcock, because that's
no, he didn't do that. I put that in the book.
You cited it like that, did
yes,
you? Okay,
right.
Okay. But when you were studying him, right, and so by studying Wilcock, you got into read, was it 3 books on the Law of One, is it? How many books is in
5.
the Law? 5 books. So you actually read all those books?
I'm not sure if I read them all. I read them all by now, but I don't know. I read a couple of them at that time.
Okay, but you were already at that time quite seasoned as an Edgar Cayce expert.
Well, the Edgar Cayce was from when I was young. I read all kinds of books about Edgar Cayce when I was young.
Okay.
You know, his source would come through him. They would say, I am Ra. Now, I took into consideration, he read the Ra material. I took into consideration that maybe he was modeling himself to say, I am Ra, from the Ra material. But his readings were so good, it could not have come from his consciousness.
But David had already read the Ra material in the late 80s, maybe
Yes,
89, 90?
Yeah.
He'd read all the books.
Right. The bottom line about anything is, who cares what the name is? If it's profound information, if it helps you understand life better, if it helps you understand yourself better, it doesn't matter whether it's Ra or Elvis, go for it. In this case, to make the connection with Ra, which I eventually decided it was an aspect of Ra, that it was not the same aspect of Ra that was talking through Carla Ruckert in the Law of One, but it was Ra, in my opinion. But somebody doesn't have to believe that. You know, one of the things about using a name is that people tend to become blind believers. They say, oh, Ra said so, or Jesus said so. It doesn't matter.
But the problem is also that the entity becomes more important than the message.
Mm-hmm. It can.
It does.
Well, you know what? I read the Bible, and I found all kinds of hugely wise things that Jesus said that I took as my own, that I understood it. And you can't help but get distortions in this realm. On one hand, if you get a name and you become famous, more people pay attention to you. And if you have something to offer, more people get to know what you have to offer.
That was all done over the telephone. Did you meet David in person at any time when you was doing the book or prior to doing the book?
One time, and it was a nightmare.
What happened?
Well, it's a long story. It's probably not worth saying right now. But he was living at Carla Ruckert's house. And I had picked up my friend in Atlanta. And she had met David. And we decided we were going to go by Carla Ruckert's house because she had been there already. And we were going to take a motel in Anchorage and then call Carla, and I would get a chance to meet David. And we drove by her house, and she insisted on running out of the house and knocking on the door. And I told her, please don't. But she did. I couldn't stop her. And then Carla came down, and I had never met David. She invited David down. And David was absolutely furious that we invaded his privacy. And we stayed there a few days. We went out with Carla. We had dinner with Carla, but never saw David again, other than when Carla pulled him down.
What did he say to you when he came down?
I can't remember.
But he wasn't happy that you turned up?
He probably said hello and tried to act gracious, but then he thought about it and said, I don't want to talk to this guy. He violated my free will.
Right,
So,
right. Okay, so that's how you first met him. So let's
But
just...
we had been working. The book was already way in progress at that point.
Oh, hang on. Right, you didn't say that. Right. I thought this was your first meeting with David.
No, this was my first physical meeting with David.
Oh, so even though you've been working together, he felt like it was a violation of his space that you just turned up.
Yeah,
But you're working together on a special book.
yeah. Well, that's how David can be a jerk like that.
So most of the book then was done over the telephone. Okay.
Most of the book was done by me writing it. Okay, and then I would turn it into David, and he would comment on it. And David added 2 chapters that were not about channeling.
Right. Go ahead.
And we didn't really work together. We talked about what was going on.
So I need to get a timeline here as well. So just bear with me, right? So let's just, with David then, he had a BA in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
He'd already been practicing automatic writing. His mother was a college professor,
Mm-hmm.
and she was also very learned in the Seth material.
Mm-hmm.
His father was a sort of a music journalist, I suppose you could call it back in the day. And there's lots of information in the book which we're going to get into, which sort of details David's sort of synchronicities that would happen in his life, in a sense, when he was younger. Lots of spiritual synchronicities. And I'm guessing he put those in the book.
Well, I took some of the stuff from material David wrote, which was posted on his website.
Okay, I got you. Okay, so to get a timeline here then, when you met him at Carla Ruckert's place, then he had already spent his time at the ARE before then.
Yes.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing. I'm gonna have to be round the houses here, right? Because this story is, I'm trying to get a grip on the story. I could make this a free-flowing conversation just on the book, but I want to know the timeline as well. Do you know what I mean?
You want me to give you some of the timelines, just to outline it?
Please.
I would say it was around 1999 that I first became aware of Wilcock, and that then I interviewed him, okay? And then the interview got a good response on the magazine. So we did another interview called When Interviews Ra. and I asked his source questions over the phone, which he answered. And probably somewhere around 2000, 2001, I said, I want to write a book about this. And he agreed. And I started writing. And I started turning my writing into him. And he told me it was terrible and I was not the right guy to write the book. And he was right. My first draft of attempting to write it, I was so intimidated inside myself that David was actually Edgar Cayce, and I didn't know how to live up to that and write about it. And I was tending to glorify Wilcock. So now he fired me, and I told him, I'm going to write this book anyway. You're a public figure, and that's okay. And I started writing it. Now I wrote it without trying to glorify David. I said how it really was, and I realized I got to a point of being inspired. And then I said, David, I'm going to send this to you. You read it. If I told them earlier I was going to publish it anyway, but now I told them, I said, David, you read it. It's your life. If you don't like it, I'll stop now and move on. I sent it to him, and about 5 or 6 days later, he got back to me and said, you're right, it's good. And one of the things about what I was writing is I was not pandering to trying to make David look good. I was saying how it really was. And I had studied and gone back to my Edgar Cayce books. There was something that people wonder today. They look at Wilcock and they can't figure out how Wilcock could be Cayce, because Wilcock is brash, loud. People think he's egotistical, arrogant, da-da-da-da-da-da. And that Cayce was this mild, gentle guy that would go to sleep and bring through this wisdom from somewhere that blew people's minds. But as I was studying Cayce, because I studied it intensely, because I was going to write this book, and I realized this book was going to get scrutinized up and down, and I had to have the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And one of the things I found out as I was studying Cayce is that Cayce had a past life by the name of John Bainbridge, who was a gambler, a womanizer, and used psychic powers in a self-serving way. And that Cayce was Bainbridge's next wife. So Cayce had to go unconscious to channel. They told Cayce in some future life he might be able to channel consciously. And there was one book by a very famous book about Cayce called A Seer Out of Season by Harmon Brough. And Harmon Brough lived in the Cayce's household for a while. And he said, the shadow of Cayce's Bainbridge life hung over him, and if he didn't keep his passions in check, he might jeopardize his ability to do readings. In fact, it seemed to take all of Cayce's willpower to stay focused and to accomplish anything at all. His own personhood was a battleground, but so were the persons of all others around him in daily life. He knew he was no saint. He could not serve as a model of an ideal spiritual life. At best, he could be seen as a warrior who kept fighting the darkness in himself as long as he could, For many who looked carefully at the story of his life, he knew that would not be enough. He knew he smoked too much, ate too much, lost his temper, criticized others, arbitrarily worried, rode his passions, forgot to put first things first, trusted too much in his own plans, failed to build community as he went. And according to Cayce's son, Edgar Cayce, the real miracle is that Edgar Cayce, with all the problems and tensions inside of him, gave readings and kept on giving them. Now, that is not the way people think of Edgar Cayce, but that is how David was seeming to me. As the more I got to know him, I could feel he was uneasy with everything. He was uneasy with doing readings and being known as a channel. Yeah.
So David was having sort of prophetic dreams, and I believe that he started writing, these dreams down, and where he got that practice from, I don't know. Obviously, with his mum being heavily into the Seth material, that,
Actually, there was a specific guy. His name was Joe, and I can't remember his last name. He never met him, but he had a big website called Great Dreams or something. And
that's what Joe. What this website was where he got the idea from.
And he used to talk to Joe, and Joe talked about this dream voice, and that people were getting messages in their dreams.
Okay.
And that's what started it.
Okay. So Joe was someone that he'd met online?
I believe so, yeah.
Oh, right.
Okay.
So trying to put this together then with David's timeline. So there was a guy called Joe that runs some sort of website that was to do with writing your dreams down, for example.
Well, they were posting dreams from people, trying to make
people.
Cases for prophetic dreams. And then there was this dream voice, which apparently Joe had experienced, where he was getting verbal messages and guidance in his dreams.
So, yeah, but then when David was writing these dreams down and they became more and more coherent in a sense, they had deeper and deeper meanings, then that switch between the dream state to his actual, to actual conscious reality where a voice started talking to him in a sense.
Now, I should say the book gives a lot of his initial dream messages. It goes through the process. And the progress of the initial communications he was getting, where finally his voice said, yes, this is the one, they told him, this is the one you have been studying. This is the Ra. They said they're the Ra group. And that whole thing is in the book at that point, the whole transcript of that.
Right, this is the Ra group. Now, for me, it's like, well, if you're going to read the Ra material before, and now you're saying you're channeling the Ra group, fair enough. But what did Carla think of that? Carla Rueckert think of that?
Well, at that point, Carla never even knew that. Okay, that was before he and Carla knew each other.
Okay.
As far as to my knowledge.
When they did know each other, when Carla Rueckert knew David, then obviously, what did she think of someone else channeling the Ra material?
Well, what had happened was David lived in her house. At first, she was accepting him. And then, as I recall, he and she were channeling to a group together. And David was a bit competitive, and that didn't go over too well.
So she was glad to see the back of him when he left that house, the LLC.
Apparently, yeah.
The LL Research Center, which I've been to in Kentucky. But going back before that, so, he's having these dreams, it's now moving into the Ra voice. How did it go from there to going to the ARE Center? Did the Ra tell him that if you want to move away from your psychology degree and kind of, go into doing the readings full time in a sense, that option started to grow for him, right?
This goes back to, it started off where a friend of his was subscribed to the ARE newsletter, Venture Inward, I think it was called. And there was a picture of a young Cayce. And his friend came over and said, "Look at this." And the picture is the one that I showed earlier. It has that close resemblance between Wilcock and Cayce. And David started studying Edgar Cayce at that point. I think that was his first key-in to that connection. And one of the things he found was a prophecy by Edgar Cayce that said, now I didn't talk about the priest. Edgar Cayce had a past life. This is very important to understand David in the present and why he does what he does. Edgar Cayce talked about his past life as an Egyptian priest approximately 10,000 years ago in Egypt. And in the Edgar Cayce material, he talks about that priest doing these miracles of healing and building the pyramids by levitation. Now, I remember reading that, and I said, how does this work? How was Edgar Cayce, his name was Rata, but then the Edgar Cayce reading said, the priest will return in 1998, be around his old acquaintances, and maybe a liberator of the world. That's my paraphrase. That's pretty close to it. And David read that. And I read that years ago. I remember reading that and saying, I hope I run into Edgar Cayce when he returns. Now it's up to interpretation. I would first think that when he says he's going to return in 1998, it means he's going to be born in 1998. And David took it to mean that he would return and he became aware that he was Edgar Cayce, or had a connection with Cayce, I believe in 1997. And in 1998, he returned to Virginia Beach. Part of David was trying to fulfill the prophecy. He started to believe he was Edgar Cayce, and he thought he was meant to do that.
But David, at the time, before he moved to Virginia Beach, from what I gather, he was doing some readings with the Ra, but he was also working with people with disabilities as well.
I didn't know him at that point, okay? When I met him, he was doing readings. He was
at the LL Research Center when you knew him?
No, I think I met him in Virginia Beach. I think I started talking to him in Virginia Beach.
Okay.
And he was doing readings then.
So the Ra group, or the essence of the group that he's talking to, that's communicating with him, that voice in a sense tells him to move to Virginia Beach, which he does do.
No, I don't believe they told him to move to Virginia Beach. I want to repeat, he took it from the Edgar Cayce prophecy about the priest that Edgar Cayce was in a past life. The priest will return in 1998, be surrounded by his old friends, and maybe a liberator of the world. That was what he, as far as I remember, that's what he was following, okay?
Okay, so he's taking it quite seriously then, right?
Well, he's getting these dream fragments, these messages. They're making a lot of correct predictions.
For people that he knew?
For the world, things in the world. Some of the stuff that he was interpreting, I thought it was a stretch the way he interpreted it, but others were really pretty specific.
Okay, so he gets to Virginia Beach.
Yeah.
And he says in your book, that members of the ARE would comment to him and say, "Oh my God, you do look like Edgar Cayce." Mm-hmm. Do you think that was true? If you never witnessed anyone say that?
I can't validate that.
No, but if I went to the ARE and I met people that used to know him back then, and they said that never happened, Would you be surprised?
Well, you know what? One doesn't know what everyone says all the time. So somebody could have said it that doesn't know that the people at the ARE wouldn't know they said it.
Right.
Okay? To me, the real bottom line is all of the things that tie him to Cayce. The real are like you can look at the 3 pictures I showed earlier. You can look at his astrology chart. You can look at the wisdom in his readings. In one of his readings, he even corrected a Cayce reading. And I mean, it was done with such authority. Do you know about that? Did you look at that one? This is very important. Cayce's most famous reading, most repeated reading, is what I call his devastation prophecy, where New York's supposed to go down in the blink of an eye, Tokyo's supposed to go down, I don't remember, West Coast is supposed to fall apart, and it's all going to happen fast. And years ago, I was living in Berkeley, and I remember occasionally leaving town with my girlfriend at the time, because I said, maybe this is the weekend of the Cayce prophecy. Well, through Wilcock, and this is in the book, by the way, they said that also, I remembered when I studied Cayce, there was another place in Cayce that said, these changes will happen gradually. I remembered that. I remembered both readings, and I remember thinking, how can it both be true? How can everything disappear in a blink of an eye, and how can these changes happen gradually? And I didn't know the answer. I was just reading books of Cayce. And now they corrected it and said that was from a false negative voice through Cayce. And they identified it, they talked all about it. Through Wilcock, they were saying it was such authority. And then I had purchased the Cayce CD-ROM. And there was a name for that source. And I searched the CD-ROM for that name, and I found other places where that source would come in. At one place, they said, we are in the heavens like Jesus is to your planet. And later I found that there was something called the Search for God group, which was a group of people that would monitor Cayce and his readings. And they gave the suggestion to not let that particular entity speak anymore because they didn't trust them. And the same thing happened with his wife and a stenographer. And anyone can look that up in the Cayce CD-ROM. But historically, everyone refers to that reading with fear and say, Cayce said everything's going to go away in a blink of an eye. And I was so impressed when I read that correction by Wilcock, and when I remembered from my own study of Cayce years before, these changes will happen gradually. Okay.
But then what if that voice which we say was negative to come through Cayce was just as negative to come through Wilcock, saying it's of light, saying that it's got all the best intentions, grandizing him to want to find himself as being the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce? Because remember what the voice said to him as well. It said that if you go public with being, and come forward to say that you are Edgar Cayce, this will be very rewarding for you in a sense. I'm personifying words there, but this will be of a good thing for you, right? Almost grandstanding him in a sense.
Well, they said it would actually... What I get is that the source that was speaking through Edgar Cayce was setting things up for Cayce to return and make an impact in this period of time. And that Cayce's readings, if people thought it was really Cayce's readings, would help them, because this is a very catalytic period of time. And the way, as I recall, the way I read the Wilcock material was not that they were telling him he'd be rewarded. They did say you can earn your living doing readings. They did say that. But they said, I remember Wilcock saying, it would be like a spiritual crime for him not to say he was Cayce, because this is a critical period in the evolution of our planet and all of us. It's what's called a dimensional shift. And there's things, obviously, at the time I was writing the book, I was, all the SHIT hadn't hit the fan that I think everybody sees is hitting the fan right now, and not knowing what's up or down. And in any case, the source that was speaking through Cayce, which I would say was the Ra group or part of the Ra group, if it was the same source that was speaking through Wilcock, which I say it was, but it's not going to read like the Carla Ruckert Ra group. It's different, And if it's the same source, they were trying to set Cayce Wilcock up to be a really important focal point for high-level information in this period of time when our planet is in such chaos.
Or this, whatever it is, which says it comes through a lot of people, is just having, not fun, but it's able to disguise itself as so many different things.
You know what? You could take anything. Everyone's going to have to make their own decision.
Of course.
All right? Read the book. You decide. I mean, some of the most lucid and loving spiritual advice, wisdom I have ever read. How could someone come up with that?
But he
you could
never,
say
there were 5 tests that Cayce left the ARE with to show that if he ever returned, these 5 tests would be met.
yes.
David refused to take any of the tests.
Well, the key to this is the 5 tests were designed by Cayce's conscious mind. They were not designed by Cayce's source.
How do you know that he took those tests? He was offered those tests and he didn't take them.
Because he wasn't getting the information. And I just told you, if his source wanted him to have the information, he would have had it. They didn't give it to him. Quite frankly, it would have been a nightmare, more of a knowing David and knowing his personality, knowing his predisposition, knowing his fear, knowing all the things I read earlier from the Harmon Bro thing. If he took those tests and was acknowledged as Cayce, it would have been far worse than him not taking them. He could have destroyed the ARE if they acknowledged him.
But
so why would his source want to, thinking, knowing that his source is paying attention to this whole process, assuming his source has some wisdom, why would his source want to open those doors to destroy the ARE, even though David was Cayce?
But then why were you, if you knew that, why were you pursuing him to make such a book to make the case?
Because I knew he was Cayce.
But then you're just as bad as if he became Cayce through the area.
No. In my case, there's a question mark here. That means each person has to use their own discernment. It's the difference between religion that says has faith in God and the difference to say, look for God and you'll find him. Okay? There's enough truth in this that people can make their own decisions if they read it without prejudice. There's a thing in the book which everything that I'm reading from the book are things that Wilcock looked at, approved. He had editing thing. One of the most amazing things in there was where he got a message in one of his readings that said, David, let our messages come through. Get your ego out of the way. We can stop disasters on your planet. And I read that and I said, could this be true? Could this be true? In another one, they said, we came to you in our religion, mainly Christianity, but we don't speak in those terms anymore because of the way religion kind of screwed it up. And I remember reading that, and I said, could this be true? You know, what are they saying there?
Well,
Now,
let me ask you this then, because on page 56 and 57 of your book, it says, in an interview with Rick Martin, Wilcock shares his ideal and mission as follows. My idea is that I do not want ego to get involved. I do not want to think of myself as anything special. I have a mission to perform. I have a job to do.
Yeah.
Well, that never lasted, did it?
Well, you know what? One of the things that happened is David was not, in my opinion, was not very good at talking about being Edgar Cayce and handling transparently the way people treated him, because people really put him down. They thought he was making it up. I know he wasn't making it up. I know the history of it. I was talking to him while things were going on. Now, he could have been wrong. It could have been negative, but I didn't find enough information to indicate that.
So whatever the results were, with either David taking the exam at the ARE to prove he was Cayce or not, which will become clear in the documentary, does it really matter to you, that side of the story?
No, because I know enough to know that, first of all, I don't believe his source wanted him to pass as Cayce. Even though he was Cayce, he was not dedicated enough to being Cayce and to the channeling work. And if they acknowledged him, then it's like putting the future of the ARE in the hands of this wild card. So whether they thought about that consciously or unconsciously, I don't think they could have acknowledged him. And I don't think his source wanted to create that kind of proof, because it could have damaged the work they did as Cayce. And I keep saying this. Instead of believing Wilcock is Cayce and say, I got to follow this guy because he knows everything. First of all, he doesn't know everything. He's made loads of mistakes. He is not, once the book came out, he stopped wanting to present himself as a channel and as a reincarnation of Cayce. But his channelings that I put in the book are awesome. They're beyond anyone who watches Wilcock talk, watches his public lectures, and listens to those channelings without prejudice will recognize that they are far deeper than David's conscious mind has ever presented itself.
Even though in the background, his mother is, quite into the Seth material, that all this sort of spiritual upbringing that he had, must have made a difference to the way he gave those readings. This is a very intelligent man. Yeah, this is a guy that studies psychology. Yeah, all this adds up to, if something is going to come through, it's coming through a vessel which can put something out that sounds rather pleasing to the ears.
Now, two things. One, it was beyond that. He couldn't have tried to write that way consciously. Number two, and this is something I have an experience of, there are certain writings that have a transcendental energy to them. And I've learned this when I was young and reading all kinds of spiritual things. Some of you may have experienced this. You read certain things, certain poems, certain channel material, certain spiritual masters. You read it, and an energy comes in. And that energy was coming in for me with the Wilcock readings. And I ran them all by my partner. and she was feeling it. Now, an interesting thing they said through Cayce, they said, as you study us, we study you. Because you see, that group soul's energy was in the readings. When you read them, you start, in my opinion, you start putting out an energy that they can find, because they can recognize the energy. And a very interesting thing happened. My partner Terry and I, when I was writing the book, went to the little coffee shops in Pasadena where we were living, and we would read the book out loud to each other. And we would read the channelings. And when we read the channelings, there was a shift in the energy. And I said, could you feel that? Do you think that's them? Do you think they're here? And I came to the conclusion, yes, they come in with, when you have a very high spiritual writing, that when you read it, and if you're the least bit open, you can feel a shift of energy. And we would be in these little coffee shops. We would spend 8 hours there. And when we were leaving, the help would say, you're not going already, are you? Because we were lifting the vibration of the whole coffee shop while we were writing the book. So, as I said all that, I'm just curious. Could you feel a shift in energy?
It's happier.
Okay. All right. I felt a shift in energy. I could be delusional. I don't care. But read the book and see if your energy shifts.
Well, happy is a shift.
Yeah. Okay.
But obviously, Cayce's readings were all about, not all, 10,000 of them were about health readings. People still go to the ARE now and can use those readings to, help them in their conditions that have similarities. I mean, I was there when I was filming, and there were people coming to the readings, right? Whether they were just viewing them as tourists, or they were going to the library, or they were actually looking at the readings. Now, David's readings weren't about that at all.
No. You know what? Every lifetime is different. When Cayce, I've asked questions about this. As you know, we have another session where we were channeling, and I've asked opportunity to ask many questions. What they do on the other side is they form a group around the person as to what the person's potential is and what is their highest intention to work through that person. Now with Cayce, there was a huge group set up, including doctors and all kinds of other people on the other side who were working through Cayce. If you read the Cayce material, and you'll know that the very first time Cayce ever channeled was when he was hypnotized. And they took the opportunity. And this is my take on this. It wasn't Cayce was talented, is when he was hypnotized, the sources that had worked with him in other lifetimes took the advantage to come in and start talking. Now, another interesting thing about the Cayce readings, Cayce was a fundamentalist Christian, and they were scared, these sources were scared that he would dump the project because they would think it was demonic. So for the first 20 years of talking through Cayce, they only did health readings. And after that, they started telling people who they were in past lives. They thought if they started bringing up reincarnation, he would dump it, because reincarnation was not a Christian principle. And that's an indication that it wasn't Cayce's talent, it was the guys on the other side who were working it. And so they're calling the shots. It's just like with Wilcock. They created a group on the other side, a subset of their group, to work through Wilcock.
But it was Wilcock that stated on his website that his idea Wilcock's idea was the Ra group was able to establish communication with Edgar in his sleeping state. Now, take that statement to Kevin Tadashi of the ARE, and they will deny that statement.
Well, Edgar Cayce never talked about the Ra group. There's, according to the ARE, there's no group soul involved with Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce was just a talented individual with psychic powers. How do people get psychic powers? How do they do stuff like that? Obviously, there was an intelligence coming to Cayce. And was it the Ra group? I make that contention it was. And I have a lot of support for that idea, but...
Where's that support coming from?
My research. I'll give you one particular incident. It has to do, I referred earlier to the lifetime of Ra-Ta, 10,000 years ago, who was the Egyptian priest who was doing these miracles of healing and built the pyramids according to Edgar Cayce. That's straight out of Edgar Cayce. Anyone can look up Ra-Ta, Egypt, and they will find the story. Well, when I was studying the Carla Ruckert material, I found an extraordinary correlation through Carla Ruckert. And in the Ra material, the Ra group says, we came upon a high priest in Egypt that we had affinity with, and we worked with him, and we actually manifested bodies that people could see, light bodies, and walked amongst the people and did all these healings and built the pyramids by levitation. It was obviously the same story as Edgar Cayce, but they never mentioned Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce never mentioned the Ra group.
Well, absolutely, because when Cayce, and this is what Wilcock is saying, that the Cayce voice was the source, right, which the ARE would agree with, yeah? The source was, Wilcock then goes on to say, was his own higher self, which that higher self was part of the soul group of Ra, and this is identified by Wilcock. But the ARE would probably disagree with that.
Mm-hmm.
You would agree with that.
I would say that's true. I mean, if you go into a Christian church and try to learn about Jesus through a church, are you going to get all the right answers? You have a group, the ARE, that is built on the principles of Cayce's life and work. But the ARE has now become a business, and they have to make sure they keep their money coming in and their sales and their reputation. And they could risk their whole business by saying David Wilcock was Edgar Cayce, So you can't use them to discredit David.
But here's the interesting thing. Obviously, David knew, as you're describing, that the Ra group would show itself as a light body, as a ball of light, would you say, maybe, or a light body? Not this human.
No, well, let me tell you, in that time when they showed themselves as a light body, through the Carla Ruckert material, they said that was a terrible mistake. Terrible. And they're still paying the consequences for it. I got to tell you why it was a mistake. It was a mistake because they won over the population. I mean, when you got guys walking around in glowing bodies and levitating pyramids, suddenly God was walking around as far as the population was concerned. And there was a priesthood in Egypt that was losing its power to this Ra group walking around that way. And when Ra-Ta died, the priesthood took over the name Ra and started creating secret societies based on the esoteric information that the real Ra group was teaching the people, which they meant to be for everyone, and the priesthood was trying to create exclusive things using fear, and they used the name Ra as their god, Amun-Ra, And religion still uses the word Amen, and Amun-Ra was not the Ra group. It was negative. In Egypt, they were doing sacrifices. It wasn't until Akhenaten that there was any attempt to bring this to light.
So when David, who's got a very close relationship with a gentleman called Corey Good right now, supports Corey Good's testimony that Corey is meeting the Ra group, and they are of a blue avian color, right? When back in the day with this book, if you had said that to David back in the day, that Ra would show itself like that, David would have said absolutely not, I'm guessing.
Well, I think once the book came out, David did not want to promote it. He didn't want to be known as Edgar Cayce. Later on, he said, I'm glad this book came out because it brought a lot of people to me. But David, in my opinion, got compromised. And I think he got compromised because he wanted to be a liberator of the world, and he had to get famous to be a liberator of the world, and he wasn't getting enough action on his channelings, and he started to get more action on conspiracy, ET, and all this other stuff.
But he was packed out with his readings.
Pardon me?
He was packed out with his readings towards the end of when the book came out. I mean, he had many, many readings booked up. He had over 500 tapes that he had in his collection, cassette tapes and everything. That doesn't sound like it wasn't working for him.
Well, it was making money, but he wanted to be a liberator of the world, and he wanted his recognition to be faster. Now, maybe in the long run, people are going to go watch this video and say, I better read Winfrey's book to see what's in that. And by, how can I say it, in a crazy way, it might influence a whole bunch of people. The book is I say this as the writer, and I'm not egotistical. I know the responses we've had over the years from the people that have read it. It's a classic, and it's never been promoted.
Ra continuously chastised David, and it comes out in the book as well, for overemphasizing his scientific side and not giving the channeled messages enough attention. Is that true or not?
Well, I would say that's true. You know, the truth of the matter is when the book came out, I had the feeling that the sources would have liked me to talk about Ra and Cayce and the connection. It would have taken it off of David's ego. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like anyone who's a creator, it's easier for someone else to talk about them than to talk about yourself. If you talk about yourself as a creator, people always usually think you got a big ego. But if somebody else talks about you, it's much more acceptable. But when the book came out, David and I went our separate ways, and David was actually hostile towards me. And I thought, in my mind, I had the thought, I think he'd prefer I wrote the book and was dead now. So
Well, let's just go to page 42 of the book, because it says, well, let's just go to this point, because in the book on page 42, it says that he dislikes the spotlight. It says here, I, David, do not wish to self-aggrandize or make myself out to be something greater through writing all of this. In fact, I dislike the spotlight and the controversy. That is why I haven't yet written up this article, and this is the article about obviously him coming out to be Edgar Cayce. So what happened to David? Because something really changed in David. Or is this complete lies, which you had to say yes to, because David's 50% of this, and David never acted that. He loved the spotlight, and this was his alter ego coming through.
You know, I would say nothing is black and white. On one hand, David was scared to go out there and be Edgar Cayce. He was scared, in my opinion, this is my observation, he was scared there would be too many people thinking he knew everything and he would answer all the questions. Then he started talking about other things and people were responding. And he said, well, people are responding to this. I'm just going to keep doing it. You know, when he said that, he probably hadn't started so much doing it. But, you know, once you start, I mean, myself, I can relate many times. If I think about what I'm doing now, and if I could possibly have thought of it, I would say, I can't do that. And then I start doing it, and it flows. I sometimes thought I was giving David the benefit of the doubt that maybe David is going to get a whole bunch of attention for all this conspiracy ET stuff. And when he has the attention, and maybe he'll still do this, who knows? David, if you watch this, I hope you do, and go back to bringing through wise channelings and helping the world through channelings. Of course, he'll get a whole bunch of negative attention. People are going to say, it couldn't be Cayce. That doesn't sound like Cayce. I don't know if he'll take the chance to do it, but to me, that would be his highest service.
So obviously when David then left the ARE, I'm guessing he moved away from the ARE over to the Law of One research facility in Kentucky. I guess because, you know, he felt that he wasn't validated at the ARE. Mm-hmm. Maybe he never passed any of the tests, or maybe he just never took the test to see if he was the Cayce reincarnated. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the Law of One material was the sort of emphasis of the whole thing anyway, so it made more sense to be at the research center. But it's a funny place to base yourself, is it not?
LL Research?
Yeah, well, not a funny, I've been there, it's a fantastic place, but to be, I guess maybe he wanted to be around his idol. Do you think she was his idol, Carla Rueckert, the lady that originally brought through the Law of One material?
The Law of One material was his idol. I mean, he looked up to it.
Yeah. But then you obviously knew him there, so how was he, well, you met him for the first time there, he wasn't very kind to you, but I mean, you know, what surprises me, for such a man with such great, amazing gifts, he wasn't a downward spiral from day one with his attitude towards others. How can you have that horrible attitude, yet you're bringing through such loving information?
I don't think that's so unusual. You know, if you look at artists, oftentimes artists can bring through great creations. I was a songwriter. I used to be able to inspire audiences. I can write great songs. And yet my personal life was not up to my songs. I couldn't even come close, and it was embarrassing because people would exalt me, and I couldn't live up to it.
But then do you feel that he was well received at the LL research facility? I mean, I heard rumours that Carla Rueckert was maybe pleased to see the back of him when he left. I mean, from such a loving lady, which I know she was, that's a bit of a statement.
Well, you know what? David was difficult to be around.
Was he?
Yeah, he was. Probably everywhere he was difficult. And, you know, if you put yourself in his head at the time, here he knows he was Edgar Cayce. I would say he knew it. He didn't have doubt about it. He knew he was bringing through these great readings, and he needed to get them received by the world. And nobody was receiving it. And he said, hey, I'm Edgar Cayce, and still didn't make them receive it. And to me, one of his greatest errors was not working with me, because I knew he was Edgar Cayce, and I knew the readings were great, and I was committed to it. But as soon as the book came out, he ran the other direction. But he didn't trust people.
Where could he have gone? He could have been so different, couldn't it?
I stopped following all that stuff that David was doing. I followed it for a while. I was trying to figure it out. I'm trying to figure out why he was doing it, why he negated all the other stuff he did. But, you know, sometimes somebody has to have vision to see the potential of something.
Yes.
And I don't think he had the vision to take the longer road of making the channeling work most important.
But he was getting a lot of readings. He had over 500 tapes accumulated or more of previous readings that he'd given to clients. He was, booked up in a sense. I know there was sometimes in his journey there was that kind of Cayce starvation famine thing where Cayce would either have money and waste it and then get it back with the readings, and there would never be that kind of fine balance. I know from studying Wilcock that he's gone through that, but I'm sure there was a turn made at some point with the financial success from the readings.
Well,
but his ego wanted more, don't you think?
Let me say something about his readings at the time. I had a reading for myself, and it was brilliant. I sent people to him to have readings, and I thought, wow, this is what a rare opportunity to get a reading from former Edgar Cayce. And there were times when David tried to do the reading out of his own conscious mind, and he totally bombed. He could not always connect to the raw group, and people wanted their money back, and he didn't give it to them, from the people that I sent anyway. So the readings were not so cut and dry easy for him.
But, when I look at this, right, obviously, like I said, he's gone into the more, conspiracy side. But then in this book that you did with him, Ra does chastise him for overemphasizing his scientific side and not giving the channeled message enough attention. So for a loving source, so if that source was corrupted, if this Ra source was corrupted through him, which I don't think it was, listening to his readings, right? Mm-hmm. This loving source was saying, don't go, that's not the highest good. Now we all have the free will to do what the hell we want, mm-hmm. right? But the thing is here with this interview is no one knows of this side of him. No one knows. He has buried this side of him being the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. So you must have felt that. He blackballed you as soon as the book came out, did he not?
Mm-hmm.
That's true?
Yeah.
Did he not say to you as well that you were going on some large talk shows with George Norrie Coast to Coast, and he said that unless you get him on that show with you, he will blackball you on his website?
He did say that, yeah.
Yeah, he did say that,
mm-hmm.
yeah. How did it feel for you after putting 3 years of effort into it? As you said, sharing those stories when you're with Terry, your partner, where you're just reading all day these wonderful things that he's channeled, and you feel the energy, it's intuitive.
Well, at the time I was very angry. I said, I felt very disregarded. And I remembered the quote that I read earlier about John Bainbridge, or Cayce's arrogance and all this stuff and all that stuff, and I said, same person.
What could have happened if he had gone a different path and continued the work? Because this path that you called for him to give him the option to go down, and well, not the option, he was already doing it, but you kind of pushed him along to say, look, there was more in this path.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think he missed out on? And what do you think others out there have had now the fortune of being misinformed and lied to in their spiritual path by the information that he's putting out now?
Well, I'm not going to say that everything he's doing is misinformed or deliberate or whatever. I think some of it, he started relying on insiders, and he was not relying on his channeled sources. And I think they were playing him. I think some of the insiders were compromised and being used to play David. And David let himself be played. That's what I think.
But people follow him like a cult movement right now. That's the problem as well.
Well, people do what they do. If they weren't following David, they'd be following someone else. If they have that disposition, then they have to play it out until they don't.
But do you think he's ever going to change? Do you think David has the potential? Well, everyone has the potential, but do you think David can see the light in what he's doing? and to see that he still has the potential to put amazing information out through his original sources.
Well, you know what? If the book starts selling, maybe he'll watch this show and say, maybe I should think twice about this and give Win a call. I don't expect that, but you never know. You can't predict. I can't predict what will happen in the future.
Do you think his soul, do you think in this moment now, if David was to speak to his collective group, and it probably will be the Ra group that would come through, what do you think the Ra group would say to him right now?
They already say it. They said, David, get your ego out of the way. Let our messages come through. We can stop disasters on your planet.
It's that simple.
Mm-hmm. Now, if I say somewhere in the middle of the book, which they started talking to me, and I start talking to these celestial sources, I couldn't put that out publicly at the time because it already sounds crazy putting it out, but that's what happened. And I can say it's not that easy a road to go putting these things out in the world. But the one thing about it is I don't try to grab people's attention. People come back and, there was a thing that Carla Ruckert said that I took seriously regarding channeling. They said when you're asking questions in channeling, looking for information, look for information that's like got true 10,000 years from now as it is now. Don't look for transitory information because you'll get a negative source. Like, will there be an earthquake in Los Angeles? Will this happen? Did so-and-so kill somebody? Those are all transitory, very short timeline windows of stuff. And that to keep from having a negative source come in, you ask for universal truths, and that keeps the energy high. Now, I'm not saying I always honor that, because as you know, I do channeling, but I don't forget it. And if I ask something that's more transitory, I'm more wary of the answer.
Has David Wilcock wanted to bury this side of his life, this part of his life experience, this channeling side? Has he wanted to bury it?
Well, lately I hear people tell me, I don't listen to him, follow him, but people tell me Wilcock's talking about channeling again. And one time in the last year, he said something positive about the book, okay?
What if I was to say to you then, did you ride the coattails of David Wilcock? You saw someone that was on the up and coming, and you were trying to build your career on the back of them.
I wrote the book because I thought it was very inspiring. His channelings were inspiring. His channelings were giving guidance. And I wrote the book to get his channelings out into the world, not to ride his coattails.
When you look back now, obviously the book came out in 2004. I'm sat with you in 2019. How do you reflect back upon that part of your life and that book?
Well, this has been the most amazing journey beyond my wildest imagination since the book came out, far beyond being an author. And the people would have to look at the other interview we did with Terry, where as a result of writing that book, I got the attention of these sources on the other side that started communicating to me, and I was accessing information, having miraculous healings, and it's I don't want to say any more about it than that, because this is not the function of this interview, but we did another tape which people can look at.
Now, there was a movie that was being planned or in the works that was going to come out based on, you know, the idea of David Wilcock and the Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, but that again didn't go through. And what were the reasons for that, or what happened there as well?
I don't know if the movie was supposed to be based on the Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. It was a movie producer that I had met with for a month, who was a friend of mine, and was intrigued with both David's story and my story. And then shortly after my meetings with him, both David and I were speaking at the Conscious Life Expo, and he came to all of our events. And then David and I did one event together at a religious science church, and he came to that. And when the expo was over and he was leaving, and David was leaving back to Carla Ruckert's house, he told both of us, "I want you guys to come up with a movie story." And David left, and nothing happened. It wasn't the idea of the Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce or anything, just a movie story that would help put the ideas out into the world of that we were both connected to. So I sent an email to David, and I sent the email to Billy. His name was Billy Blake. I sent the email to Billy Blake, and I told him an idea, and I CC'd it to David. And I said, "I'm not attached to this, it's a rough idea. Let's see what anyone thinks." And then David sent an email and said that, essentially sent it to Billy Blake and said, "I'm the star here, and if we're going to make a movie, I want it to be my movie, and that we'll use Win as a consultant if he wants to be." So at that point, I dropped out of the project, and David then moved to L.A. under the auspices of Billy Blake, and spent about 3 years or so working with Billy Blake, but not coming up with a movie story. And then, but he used to always announce he's working with a major producer. You know, he's really good at making it sound like he's doing something, and it's unbelievable the way people buy into it, because he changes it when it dies. But for the moment, I'm working with a major producer, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And eventually, he went off to another guy and abandoned Billy Blake. Billy called me and was very hurt. I forget, who's the guy who did the Communion movie. But I don't believe any movie is pending at this point. But David got a lot of people to follow him because he said he was a movie producer.
Do you think David has gone down the wrong path?
You know what? In the highest sense, there's no such thing as a wrong path. People learn, they get their lessons. I think maybe David compromised himself, and people that study him carefully usually don't find him consistent. But David changed my life. I'm ultimately totally grateful for my connection with David. He has done things to diss me, and I forgive him for that. And I hope he tunes into his very highest path in the future, because he can make a huge difference.
Well, Winfrey, just thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me tell my story.